haven't met anyone that wants to have Alzheimer's. Is that right? No one wants to have Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's doesn't develop quickly. In fact, some people might think it does because they suddenly start to have some lack of memory, they start to have a few things, but it actually hasn't developed quickly. It's developed over a long time. See, what we do in our 20s is revealed on our 40s. What we do in our 40s is revealed in our 60s. What we do in our 60s is revealed in our 80s. And in my last lecture, I drew our brain, and I'm going to draw it again. And we're looking at the prefrontal cortex, and I'm sure you'll remember that the prefrontal cortex has 4 functions, and these 4 functions basically go down when someone has Alzheimer's. So when someone has Alzheimer's, how's their intellect? It's not very good, is it? How are their reasoning powers? Not very good. How is their judgment? Terrible. And so as you can see, that when someone has Alzheimer's, the part of the brain that is directly affected is the prefrontal cortex. And because the intellect and reason and judgment are gone, the decisions are terrible. In fact, I have people come to me saying, I woke up in the middle of the night, my wife was gone, I went outside, I saw her walking down the main road with no clothes on. Another man said, I woke up, my wife wasn't there, she's in the next door's yard taking their clothes off the clothesline and putting them on. And strange things, their reason, their intellect and their judgment is not working. So the $1 million question is why? Because Proverbs 26 verse 2 states that the curse causeless shall not come. It's Old English. It basically means no problem, no depression, no Alzheimer's, no dementia happens without a cause. There is always a cause. And in the little book, The Ministry of Healing, I love that formula. She says in the case of sickness, the cause should be ascertained. This is on the 2nd page in the chapter, The Physician, the Educator. Cause should be ascertained. So how do you ascertain the cause? There's one way to ascertain the cause, and that is the history. The history. And we are what we are because of our history. So you have a clear look at the exposure to chemicals. So we're going to flip backwards and forwards here. So we'll look at the sustain me principles, because the sustain me principles directly affect the functioning of the brain. The brain and the eyes are connected. In fact, the eyes are an extension of our brain. And this is where sunshine is very important to the brain. It needs sunshine. The brain needs sunshine, and it gets it through the eyes. Water. Our brain is a hydroelectric system. Sleep. We're going to have a look at 9:30 tomorrow morning, all the processes that happen while we sleep, but we'll touch on it tonight in its relation to Alzheimer's. Trust in God. Anxiety. Depression, which is really a lack of trust in God, can all contribute. Abstain. There are many things that are damaging the nerve cells in the area of chemicals, environmental poisons, especially mercury, moles, all having an effect to interfere with brain function. Inhale. We looked at the importance of inhaling through our nose. Nose purifies the air, humidifies the air, warms the air. Mouth does not do that. When we breathe through our nose, we're getting more oxygen in the brain. Nutrition. Our brain needs peak nutrition because we need to supply the building materials of the brain. We need to supply the building materials of the neurotransmitters. We need to supply the fats that keep the cells supple and protect the myelin sheath, as we touched on in our last lecture. Moderation in all the good things. Some things can be great, but if you overdo them, they can be harmful. Yes, we need to eat, but when you overload the stomach can't digest it all, and it fogs the brain. Exercise increases the circulation of the blood to the brain. So when we look at history, we use this as our guideline. And often we target that little area, abstain. Has the person been exposed to anything that could damage the brain cells? Environmental poisons, toxic poisons, heavy metals. Are there mercury fillings in the mouth? So you investigate. And it's the history that will give you an idea. So in case of sickness, ascertain the cause. Unhealthful conditions changed. How do you know if a condition is unhealthful? Get out of the mouldy house. I've had 2 men attend our program who got depression 6 months after moving into a mouldy house. So how so? So now we need to go to our nerve cell. Here's our nerve cell. And here are our receiving stations. And our receiving stations, our dendrites, are the ones that pick up the neurotransmitters. They encapsulate them, send them down the arm, and then they go into the little boutons. These are the boutons. And the neurotransmitters flash across to the receiving station, the dendrites from the next nerve cell. So I'll show you how this happens. So here are the little neurotransmitters. They come in, they're encapsulated, they're sent down the arm into the little boutons, and then they're released out from the boutons to the next nerve cells. That's basically how it happens. And those neurotransmitters can be travelling anywhere between 200 and, shouldn't be read, 200 and 200 miles an hour. And in a crisis, that's about 200 miles an hour. So when it says unhealthful conditions changed, say there is a mouldy house, remember that when oxygen is present in the nerve cell, it's going to give us 36 units of energy. But when someone's breathing in mouldy house, in mold from a mouldy house, there's not much oxygen there. And that top pathway that has no oxygen, that only gives 2 units of energy. Our brain needs oxygen. Maybe the person is living underneath the electrical towers. And those electrical towers, there's 500 times the electromagnetic field that's usually on the planet. That's how much it's increased under the electrical towers. It used to be that houses weren't allowed to be built under those electrical towers. But if you noticed, in some housing estates, they're there. And they're the cheapest house on the estate. Another one I have found is when there's been landfill and there's been a lot of chemicals dumped, and then housing estates are built. And then you'll find that in every house there's sicknesses. Some houses, Alzheimer's, some houses depression, some houses cancer, some houses what they call autoimmune diseases, somehow, you see, arthritis, people react in different ways. That's why you can never be absolute on the cause. There are some common causes, but there are also differences in every case. Unhealthful conditions changed, wrong habits corrected. How do you know what the wrong habits are? You go through those laws of health. Are you drinking adequate water? Are you getting sunshine every day? Are you going to bed early? What sort of food are you eating? So that's how you ascertain whether habits need to be changed. And then nature is to be assisted. And we're going to have a look at this bit. And we're going to have a look at what can be taken to assist in the treatment of Alzheimer's and also the prevention. So you always look at the history. Symptoms are your body saying, excuse me, there's a problem and I need you to do something. And as you try simple natural treatments, your body will say, I like it, or your body will say, no, that's not doing much. So you adjust, and how you know how to adjust is you watch your body's response. And this is how we can be our own doctors. Yes, you might go to a specialist or a doctor or a naturopath or a functional doctor or a nutritionist or a herbalist and get their advice, but what do you do with that advice? You try it. You take it or leave it. And if it doesn't work, what's your body saying to you? We need to try something else. Because there's no one like you. That's why you're the doctor. So what we have found, and I'll give you a story to illustrate. We had a lady who lived with us for many years. She actually approached Michael, her name was Anne, and she said, Michael, I want to build a house on your property. So when I die, it's yours, but you look after me. Michael said, well, I don't mind looking after you, but he said, how do your daughters feel about you putting all your money into that? She said, I don't care what they think, because she said, I watch, they waste their money. She said, I worked hard for my money and I believe in what you're doing and I want to support it. Well, it eventually came about. Michael spent a lot of evenings talking to her children, her daughters and their husbands. And eventually he said, you know she's going to give it away. Who do you want to give it to? And they eventually agreed, yes, we like what you're doing. Anyway, we built her a lovely house on the property, and I need to draw you a map to show you what happened. So we built her a lovely house on the property. Our house was here, and it was a 1,200 acre property. Her house was there, and then the health retreat was over here. And sometimes you could drive this way, and there was a creek there, and there was a creek there, and the creek actually went like this. And it'd take 10 minutes to drive to the retreat, and often we'd stop and have a little chat to Anne, and Michael would often leave his ironing there, and when I come back in the afternoon, she'd have the ironing hanging on the veranda. And it worked very well, and if we went to town, she came with us, and sometimes she'd come for a meal, and we dropped leftovers from the health centre, and it all worked very, very well. And after about 5 years, we had a big truck come in. So this was the road from outside. A big truck came in with gravel, and he stopped at the house, and he said to Anne, hey lady, do you know where I've got to take this truck? She said, I'm not sure. Ask those 3 men over there. He looked over there, got in the truck, and went up to the retreat where Michael was, and he said, is that lady all right? She asked me to ask the 3 stumps. There were 3 tree stumps. She said, ask these 3 men. That was the first indication we had that Anne's mind was starting to slip. And so one of our girls went and sat with Anne all morning and chatted to her. And at one point, Anne was waving. And Evelyn said, what are you waving at? She said, look at the nuns running up the hill. Look at them all. And that's when we started to see she was such a happy, jolly lady that you didn't actually quite see it until things like that happened. And so what Evelyn did, she when Anne went out on the veranda, she went in, looked in her bathroom, she looked behind the door, and there's all the food from the last few weeks, half eaten and mouldy. So she was eating mouldy food. And sometimes when people have Alzheimer's and their reason, intellect and judgment starts to slip, they're not making good decisions. And Evelyn also found the iron still on. So she wasn't turning the iron off, and that's when we realised we needed to take her to our house. And so she lived in a room at our house, and because we were so busy running the retreat and several things, we got a nurse to look after her. But the nurse would last about 2 days and jump in the car and leave, because Anne would not do anything anyone said except for Michael and I. And Michael would go to town with her and he'd say, "Are you drinking?" She said, "I've drank lots." And her bottle's full of water. And we started to realise she was not drinking any water. The brain is a hydroelectric system. From the neck up, we're 85% water. From the neck down, we're 75% water. Water is essential. So we started to see a few things. And then Michael said to me, "Do you know, I remember Anne. And Anne is well known, she never goes to bed before midnight." So here is another point. And Dr. Matthew Walker shows this in his book, Why We Sleep, that in the night, especially the hours before midnight, there's the glymphatic system. And the glymphatic system, it cleans up waste from neuronal activity. It's the brain's vacuum cleaner. It cleans up, yes, thorns from negative emotions when we forgive. It cleans up waste from combusting oxygen and glucose at the cellular level. But if, and all through our lives, it's not unusual that little calcified deposits can build up a little bit here and there in the prefrontal cortex, especially if the person's on a high acid diet. What's a high acid diet? A lot of meat? Well, Anne was a vegetarian, but she ate a lot of carbohydrates. She ate a lot of wheat, a lot of sugars. And those little calcified deposits, a few of them build up, but when we go to bed early, the glymphatic system can mop up those little calcified plaques so they don't develop. And what they have found in cases of people with Alzheimer's, they do post-mortems on them and they've got calcified deposits called amyloid plaques, all built up in the prefrontal cortex. So when those amyloid plaques build up there, they inhibit intellect, they inhibit reason, they inhibit judgment. So here was another aspect with Anne. Anyway, not long after that we moved to another property, because this property was very remote, and this property was 2 hours from town. And we had no electricity, we had solar panels, and so when a property an hour closer came up, we quickly negotiated with that and were able to buy it and move our business over a little bit closer. And as we went to the new property, we had a little room for Anne to live in, and we'd take turns in just keeping an eye on her. But I was lecturing one day, and Anne came running up the stairs and says, Barbara, Michael's just been killed in a car accident." And all the guests went like this, but I knew straight away that this was in Anne's mind. And then another time, Michael and I were driving home and she was lying on the side of the road crying. I said, "Anne, what are you doing?" "All my family's been killed in a car accident." So Michael rang up her 3 daughters and said, "Anne's mind is deteriorating, so we just suggest you come and visit her." Well, one daughter came and just criticised everything we were doing, criticised that we weren't spending enough time with her, that she didn't have enough toilet paper in her bathroom, that, she didn't like the colour of the... it was just... ooh. And then the other daughter, they just didn't have time. And then the third daughter, Michael, rang her and she said, my mother died 25 years ago, and hung the phone up. Now that told us there were some emotional issues there. Because Anne only ever talked of the two daughters. In fact, you wouldn't even know she had this third daughter, so she'd almost cut her off in her mind. And then Michael and I were going overseas for 2 weeks. So we rang the two daughters and we said, can you take Anne for 2 weeks? No, we can't. So we had to find out what to do with her. And so we decided to put her in respite. But then we found we had to have a doctor's certificate to assess her. So we took her to the doctor, and the doctor said, how are you, Anne? She said, oh, my stomach's sore. He said, why? She said, every time I go out the front door, my sister-in-law shoots me and my stomach's full of bullets. And she would say it as if it was just a totally natural thing. And that's when we realised here was another emotional factor. She loved her brother, Roy. And her poor sister-in-law, who was a lovely lady, could never do anything right. So see, there's another emotional tension there. So we're starting to see what you call glitches in the army. We're starting to see, this is why this is your guideline. This will tell you where the problems lie. So we easily got her into a respite place, and we'd say to her, and we're just going to leave you in this accommodation, that's what we called it, just for 2 weeks. And, they do your hair and you go on bus trips. She said, can't my daughters take me? Oh, they're busy. Unfortunately, they can't. So we took her there. She went in and she said, this is an aged care facility. We said, Audrey, Anne, it's not long. It's not long. It's just until we get back. We're so sorry. We'll ring you every day. We'll ring you every day. So we left feeling terribly bad. And we rang a few hours later. How is she? Oh, she's laughing. She's found a couple of ladies she's become very good friends with. We rang every day and we found out that she was doing very well and she was quite enjoying it. So 2 weeks we flew in, we went straight to pick her up. And we said, how did you enjoy it, Anne? She said, it's very good. And she said, in fact, I don't want to go home with you. We said, oh? She said, no, you don't do my hair every week. They come and do my hair every week. You don't take me on bus trips twice a week. I'm staying here. We actually thanked God because we just didn't know what to do. And she'd had, I'd say, nearly 10 years with us. And it had been good. The last year had been difficult. And as anyone who's had an elderly relative with dementia, it's very, very difficult to look after them because it almost needs 24-hour care. We would go and visit her twice a week. The staff would go and visit her. Michael would take her shopping with him. And so we did much. And she said, Michael, I want you to spend all my money. She said, I just want you to leave enough to cover my funeral. And then she was there for about 2 years and we found out that she was in a coma. We discovered that she had a tumour and it had blocked off her colon, so she was in a coma. We also discovered they called her the ice cream queen. She just lived on ice cream. Now, Anne, when she was younger, was very, very fussy on not eating things like ice cream. But you know, when someone's got dementia and their reason, intellect and judgment goes to this point, it's very difficult to get a turnaround. Anyway, we're thankful that she passed within the next week. I think she was in her late 80s when she finally passed. But it's an illustration to show, and many people would say, how could that lady have dementia? She lived at your retreat. That is true. But when you have a look at this guideline, you start to see Anne did not like the sunshine. She never went out there. She said, no, I'll just get burnt. Do you know if you get burnt, you're only out there for 5 minutes. You might be out there for 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the afternoon, and your skin will be able to handle it. We could not get her to drink water. And you're not going to hold the person down and force it in. It's very difficult. And she just insisted that she'd had water. So that's very difficult. Michael would say, well, Anne, we're not going anywhere until you drink half that bottle. Then she'd begrudgingly drink it. But it's really hard to be on top of someone like that all the time. Sleep. She'd been a terror for sleep. Now that we see what lack of sleep does, you see there are two very famous people that boasted that they only needed 5 hours sleep a night. One is Margaret Thatcher, the other is Ronald Reagan. And how did they spend the last 20 years of their life? With severe Alzheimer's, severe dementia. So lack of sleep is a big one. And we also find that even though someone might love God and trust God, when they get dementia, they find it very hard because it's like their mind is not in the right place. We also find when someone has dementia, they'll just eat anything, they'll just drink anything. Like Anne, in her latter years, she ate and drank things she would never have considered in her right mind. So it gets in this vicious circle. Nutrition wasn't very good at all. Exercise, that wasn't happening. And so we see why Anne suffered from dementia. And you can see also that it didn't happen overnight. And whenever we tried to talk to her about her daughter and her sister-in-law, she would not. She would not go there. And a man convinced against his will be of the same opinion still. You see, God's government is a government of freedom. He never forces. And so we, of course, cannot force. So there were some areas that it was almost impossible for us to resolve. But we look at that because we don't want to go there. And then we had a lady come and attend our program. She came with her mother. She's 45. Her mother was about 75. And her mother had dementia. And I remember going into the bedroom and the mother was just looking straight through me. You almost couldn't connect with her. She just stood there. And as we investigated, we discovered the lady wasn't drinking any water. We discovered she hadn't opened her bowels for 6 hours. So for little by little, we encouraged her to drink water. We found that she would drink some hot peppermint tea. And we encouraged her to have that little bit of salt. We gave her some herbs to get the bowels moving. Within 48 hours, her mind was clear. She was looking straight at us and she was talking to us. And on Wednesday night, when we did the poultice demonstration, she was telling us about all the things that her mother did to her when she was a little girl. Her daughter was so excited about the turnaround in her mother, she booked in for a second week. And in that second week, she spent most of her time on the phone, arranging to get her mother out of aged care, and she brought her mother back home because she didn't have to micromanage her mother anymore. Because her mother's mind became clear, her mother started to make decisions that were good for her body and her mind. And her mother lived with her for another 10 years until she finally passed. So as you can see in both those stories, there are different factors to come together in different situations. But what I think is really alarming is the amount of people who are coming down with dementia. And we come into this area here, abstain, who are on the cholesterol-lowering medication. Because the side effect of cholesterol-lowering medication, we'll just call them the cholesterol meds, the side effect is Alzheimer's and dementia. How many in aged care facilities are showing Alzheimer's and dementia who are on the cholesterol-lowering medications. And as I showed you, when we looked at the heart, cholesterol is not the cause of heart disease. The cause of heart disease is damage to the arterial walls. And because the damage is happening to the arterial walls, the liver releases cholesterol to actually patch up the holes. So to say that cholesterol causes heart disease is like saying the fire trucks are causing the fire. Now, what we should be asking, if there is cholesterol build-up, why? Why is the body doing that? Because it doesn't do it for no reason. And so to come in with cholesterol-lowering medications actually is not helping the problem, because our body needs cholesterol. And one of the reasons our body needs cholesterol is that this little fatty sheath around the nerve cell is predominantly cholesterol. You see, cholesterol plays a protective role. And that's why I mentioned earlier, if someone's on a fat-free diet, they've got mercury fillings in their mouth, they're having the flu injection every year which has mercury in it, they're eating fish every day, and maybe on top of that they're not drinking enough water, and on top of that they're going to bed at midnight every night, there's a recipe for dementia. That's a recipe for Alzheimer's. But for some people, they might react in something like Parkinson's. Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, Huntington's chorea, multiple sclerosis are all indications of damage to different parts of the nerve cell. So then the question is, well, what's caused the damage? So the Muhammad Ali, the boxer, he also had dementia in his latter years, but I think it was purely just physical damage. You see, our skull was created by God to be a protective armour. Notice with our skeletal system, it is an internal structure causing us to stand upright. But when it comes to the head, it becomes an external structure, protecting the most delicate and yet most important organ in the body, which is headquarters, which is the brain. But around that brain there are 7 layers of fascia. What's fascia? It's balloon-type material, and in between each layer of fascia there's fluid. So if we do fall, and I had a crash a few nights ago, and yes, I was encouraged to get a CT scan just because it was right at my temple where it's quite thin there. And the CT scan showed that my brain's working very well and there is no damage. So some of my close friends were a little bit concerned. I said, oh, righto. And it showed that there was no damage because there are 7 layers of fascia and there's that fluid around. But if that happened to me every single day, day after day, after week after week, after month after month, after year, then that protective covering would actually start to be the cause of damage. There's a movie / documentary called Concussion. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a true story on football in America. And the leading actor, I think it's Will Smith that plays it, he does a post-mortem on a famous football player that took his life. I think he was in his 60s. He was hearing voices and getting noises in his brain that he couldn't bear it, and he'd gone to test after test after test, but it showed that there was nothing wrong. So coming away and being told there's nothing wrong with you, that's very frustrating. And so what Will Smith, who was a neurologist, did, he opened his brain, but what he did was he spliced up the brain. And when he spliced it up, he started to see all the little scar tissue, all the damage that those other tests hadn't picked up. And when he revealed this scarring in this famous football's brain, do you know, Football America rose up, they closed his clinic, he lost his job, he actually had to leave the country. And one of the team on on the organisation that rules that in the football. 10 years later, same thing happened to him. He was getting noises, voices. He could not rest, he could not sleep. He took his own life. And he left a paper there. He wanted this neurologist to do a post-mortem on his brain. And he did, and he found the same thing. And it was because of that, it was revealed. Do you know it's often called football migraine? But everyone knows it's damage to the brain. And I know in Australia there's rugby league, and you know they do scrums where they've got their heads down and they're barging against each other in their scrums. And sometimes I'll see a footballer just walking around the field like this. It's just been one tackle too many. I don't know, I don't watch football, but sometimes if you watch the news, you've got to look through the little shorts on the sports to get to the weather. And sometimes you'll see a tackle and you'll think, oh, how do they survive? They survive 1 and 2 and 3, but the damage, bang by bang's being done. And so that's what basically is with Muhammad Ali. It was just too much damage on the brain. And so the damage in the brain can be caused by various things. But I'm sure if Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher had known what I'm going to show you tomorrow night and what I touched on tonight, that the vacuum cleaner system that is the most active in the early part of the night, made up of glial cells, one of its roles is to clean up any little amyloid plaques that might start to surface in the early parts of the night. So going to bed early protects the brain against that happening. And so to prevent Alzheimer's, we need sunshine every day. We need to keep well hydrated. And to help with hydration, we have the whole salt before every glass of water, just a tiny little crystal. To prevent Alzheimer's, we make sure we go to bed early. And I showed you in the last lecture how you can rewire your brain. One lady said, I go to bed at midnight every night, and I know that if I lay down at 9 o'clock, I'm not going to sleep. So you know what she did? She started to go to bed at 11:30. 2 weeks later, she started to go at 11. 2 weeks later, she started to go to bed at 10:30. 2 weeks later, she started to go to bed at 10. And little by little, she trained her brain back into sleep. But I'll show you in more detail tomorrow. Abstain. If you stop cholesterol-lowering medications tonight, tomorrow you will have a side effect. Your memory will return. It's one of the side effects, memory loss. There is absolutely no danger in stopping the cholesterol-lowering medications immediately. In my book, Sustain Me, I've got a chapter, it's called Love Your Heart with All Your Heart. And at the end of that chapter, I list all the books, the Great Cholesterol Con, the Great Cholesterol Lie, the Great Cholesterol Deception, Great Cholesterol Hoax, Great Cholesterol Myth. We're running out of names. I'm not a doctor, but they've all been written by doctors and specialists that are blowing the whistle on it. That's why we need to know for ourselves. That's why God gave us this brain, this prefrontal cortex, reason, intellect and judgment, so that every decision we make be made according to that, because our decisions determine our destiny. So there are some things that absolutely must stop. If you're a coffee drinker, my suggestion is start easing off it. Ease off it little by little by little. There's a book called Caffeine Blues, and his subtitles are Become Aware to America's #1 drug. That's what he calls it. When a person has a cup of coffee, it's like they've created a crisis in the body. That's why they like it. It just gets my brain going, just makes me feel good. That's right, it's created a crisis. People say to me, do you drink coffee, Barbara? I say, no, I just watch the people suffer. day one at our health retreats. People suffer more from caffeine withdrawals than any other withdrawal. We've had people come off methamphetamines, which is ice, heroin, methadone, alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana. No one suffers like the coffee drinker. I'm talking about short term. They recover quicker. Usually by the third day they're feeling very good. But those other addictions can take a little bit longer. That's how I know that the 2 days on juicing, the sweating, the steam baths every afternoon, it's a great way to detox, to get off stimulants. So it's important to stop anything that's interfering with brain function. Wheat gets the blood sugar level up high and then a corresponding dump. Sugar and wheat both do that, the hybridised wheat. And our brain wants a steady, consistent delivery of fuel. That's when your prefrontal cortex works well. But the quick highs, producing the lows, then the highs again, no, that interferes with proper function of prefrontal cortex. Inhale through the nose so your brain cells get more oxygen. When you give the body full nutrition, it can prevent Alzheimer's. And what they're showing now is another contributing to Alzheimer's is lack of B vitamins. B vitamins are often called the brain vitamins. So where do we get our B vitamins? Our raw nuts and seeds are probably the highest source. Also some in your whole grains and legumes. So your B vitamins are your brain vitamins. That helps to protect your brain. What also helps protect the brain is fat. What's also important for the B vitamins to function is minerals. And you get your minerals in your dark green leafy vegetables and also your Celtic salt. So once again we get to the 3 essential nutrients: fibres, proteins and good fats. Moderation in all the good things. If you overeat, I can tell you right now, you'll be falling asleep all afternoon in the office. You want a sparky brain? Don't overeat. Exercise increases the circulation of the blood to the brain. And so these sustain me principles will sustain us and protect us from Alzheimer's. That's the good news. But there's one more aspect of exercise, and that is exercising the brain. Challenge it. Learn new things. We should be learning new things right up until the day we die. A.A. Milne, the poet, he said, "The world is full of so many things, we all should be as happy as kings." So it's learning new things. My husband learnt to fly a helicopter. I think he grew a lot of new dendrites in that time because he learnt to fly a manual, a Bell 47, and he told me that you have to do 5 different things at once. The right foot, the left hand, and the right hand is doing 2 things. Whew. I think when he learnt to fly the helicopter, he grew a lot of extra dendrites. Every time we learn something new, we develop more dendrites. You know, God designed the human body with an incredible capacity. He designed the brain with an incredible capacity. And it was never God's design that we human beings spend the last 10, 20 years of our life with Alzheimer's or dementia. That is not God's design. God's design is that we have an abundant life. He said, "I've come that you might have life, but have it more abundantly." So we can do much to prevent Alzheimer's by implementing these simple lifestyle changes, making sure we do get daily sun, that we're well hydrated, that we can train ourselves back into more sleep. I did. I'll show you how I did it tomorrow morning. Trust in God. He's worthy to be trusted. He's faithful. Abstain from anything. If there are things that you're taking that you'd like to stop, ease off them. Try a couple of days fast. Book into Eden Valley Health Retreat or Living Springs in Alabama. Eden Valley's in Colorado. They have the 2-day juice fast. You can stay there for a week. So that's an easy way to actually come off your stimulants. Start looking at more nourishing food, eating breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen. Do all good things in moderation, and look at implementing an exercise program. And I thank God every day that it is that simple and that it is within the reach of each one of us. So I trust you've learned a few things. I trust you're encouraged and inspired to look after this incredible brain we've got, and also to start challenging it, learning new things. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 9:30, where we explore in detail sleep. Thank you.